You didn't choose your food beliefs. They were handed to you by cereal companies, government committees, and marketing departments with billion-dollar budgets. Every rule you follow, every food you fear, every label you trust. We're burning it down, starting now. 1. You've been told since the fat phobia era that dietary fat goes directly into your body fat, and this one catchy phrase launched one of the most expensive and damaging nutritional mistakes in modern history. The commandment was simple: fat makes you fat. So people swapped butter for margarine, whole milk for skim, and eggs for sad egg white omelets, all in devoted service to a rule that was never based on solid science to begin with. Here's what actually happened. The foundational study behind this entire movement was physiologist Ancel Keys's 7 countries study from 1958, which cherry-picked data from 7 of 22 available countries, specifically because those 7 supported his conclusion. The 15 countries he quietly excluded contradicted him entirely. That omission shaped decades of dietary guidelines. When food companies stripped fat from their products, they had a problem. The food tasted like cardboard. Their fix was sugar and refined starch, poured into low-fat yogurts, reduced-fat cookies, and fat-free salad dressings, in quantities that are genuinely staggering when you look at the ingredient lists. Fat is not optional ornamentation in your diet. It is required for absorbing vitamins A, D, E, and K, all fat-soluble. Meaning that without dietary fat, those nutrients pass through your system completely unused. Healthy fats actively support HDL cholesterol, the kind associated with reduced cardiovascular risk. The low-fat era ran from approximately 1980 to 2000, and during that exact window, obesity and type 2 diabetes rates climbed sharply, the precise outcomes the guidelines were designed to prevent. A 2020 meta-analysis in The Lancet found no significant association between total fat intake and cardiovascular mortality once sugar intake was controlled. You blame the wrong ingredient, rebuilt the food supply around the wrong enemy, and the results are still visible in every grocery store aisle today. 2. You grew up hearing that breakfast is the most important meal of the day with the kind of certainty usually reserved for physical laws, as though skipping it triggers some biological catastrophe that sends your metabolism spiraling before 9 in the morning. This phrase was not discovered in a laboratory, it was written in an advertising brief. The specific origin traces to a 1944 marketing campaign by General Foods, manufacturer of grape nut cereal, which hired Edward Bernays, the architect of modern propaganda, to make breakfast cereal a cultural necessity rather than just one option among many. Even earlier, John Harvey Kellogg was promoting grain-based morning meals in the 1800s, not for nutritional reasons, but for moral ones. He genuinely believed bland cereals would suppress immoral thoughts in patients at his sanitarium. The science that followed was almost entirely industry-funded or misinterpreted. The concept of metabolic starvation mode from skipping breakfast, the idea that your body panics and clings to fat without an 8 a.m. feeding, has been repeatedly examined and repeatedly fails to materialize under controlled conditions. A 2014 randomized controlled trial, published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, found no significant difference in weight loss outcomes between breakfast eaters and skippers when total daily calories were matched. The body does not issue metabolic penalties for missing a morning meal. Intermittent fasting protocols, many of which routinely skip breakfast, show comparable or superior results for insulin sensitivity, inflammation markers, and body composition when compared against traditional meal schedules. Individual chronobiology varies genuinely. Some people function better after an early meal, others perform better fasted until midday, and neither response is a malfunction. The meal isn't the problem or the solution. The marketing masquerading as medicine is. You've been structuring your morning around advice that a cereal company paid someone to manufacture, and the bowl of oats is not medicine. It is marketing with milk. 3. 8 glasses of water, 8 ounces each, every single day. Non-negotiable. This rule has haunted perfectly hydrated people for generations. turning them into anxious water tracking machines, convinced their kidneys will stage a formal protest if they fall 1 glass short of an arbitrary daily quota. The number was never a clinical prescription. It came from a single misread sentence in a 1945 U.S. Food and Nutrition Board document, which stated that adults need approximately 2.5 liters of water daily. The very next sentence, the one that almost no one read, copied, or shared, clarified that the vast majority of this quantity is already contained in the food you eat. That sentence did not make the poster. Nephrologist Dr. Heinz Valten published a comprehensive review in the American Journal of Physiology in 2002, analyzing the available evidence and finding no scientific basis for the 8x8 rule in healthy adults living in temperate climates. Water needs are not flat or universal. They shift based on your body mass, ambient temperature, physical activity level, diet composition, altitude, and individual kidney function. Applying one number to 8 billion metabolically distinct people is not medicine. It is a mnemonic pretending to be physiology. Fruits and vegetables contribute substantially to fluid intake. Cucumbers are 96% water, strawberries 91%. And a diet built around whole foods provides meaningful hydration before you lift a single glass. Coffee and tea, despite the persistent dehydration myth that follows them everywhere, contribute net fluid to your hydration in habitual consumers. The mild diuretic effect of caffeine is more than offset by the fluid volume consumed. The opposite problem, overhydration, is a documented clinical risk. Hyponatremia, a dangerous dilution of blood sodium, has hospitalized and killed endurance athletes who drank excessive plain water without electrolyte replacement. Your body already has a built-in notification system for hydration status. It is called thirst. It works. You do not need a tracking app to confirm it. 4. Every child has been told this, every parent repeats it, and every children's nutrition poster has illustrated it with a smiling cartoon root vegetable. Eat your carrots and you'll see better in the dark. It is delivered with such nutritional authority that generations of people believe beta-carotene is essentially eye medication in vegetable form, that a sufficient quantity of orange produce will sharpen your night vision into something almost predatory. It will not. The myth was born from a deliberate military deception, and it was so effective it outlived the war by 80 years. During World War II, Britain's Royal Air Force developed airborne radar technology, classified as airborne interception, that dramatically improved their ability to intercept German bombers in night conditions. To conceal this technology from enemy intelligence, the British government fed the press a cover story. Their pilots' extraordinary accuracy came from a carrot-heavy diet. German intelligence reportedly investigated the claim and began feeding their own pilots increased carrot rations in response. The deception succeeded operationally. The nutritional fiction survived the war entirely. Vitamin A, which the body synthesizes from beta-carotene in carrots, is genuinely essential for producing rhodopsin, the photopigment that enables low-light vision. That part is real. But the benefit only applies to people who are already deficient in vitamin A. In populations with adequate vitamin A status, eating additional carrots produces zero measurable improvement in night vision. The receptor sites are already saturated. You cannot stack the benefit beyond sufficiency, regardless of how many carrots you consume. Severe vitamin A deficiency causes a condition called nyctalopia, or night blindness, which remains a genuine public health issue in parts of sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia, but is vanishingly rare in well-nourished populations. One more thing. Beta-carotene is fat-soluble, meaning the raw carrot stick you are eating dry is absorbed poorly. The British government lied to German spies and accidentally got you too. You've been eating propaganda for 8 decades. 5. The farmer's market hall feels virtuous in a way the frozen food aisle simply cannot match. Fresh is best. Everyone knows this. The vibrant, soil-adjacent produce sitting in your tote bag radiates nutritional superiority over the plastic bag in your freezer that you bought out of guilt and vague practicality. The science disagrees with the aesthetic. Frozen produce is frequently more nutritious than its so-called fresh counterpart sitting on a grocery store shelf, sometimes by a significant margin. Most commercially sold fresh produce is harvested before peak ripeness specifically to survive the logistics of transportation and extended shelf time. It continues ripening after harvest, but without the parent plant supplying nutrients, it cannot complete the development process that occurs when left to mature naturally on the vine or in the ground. Frozen produce takes the opposite path. It is typically harvested at peak ripeness, when nutrient content is at its highest, then briefly blanched and frozen, locking in that nutritional peak. A 2017 study published in the Journal of Food Composition and Analysis by researchers at UC Davis found that in multiple categories, including broccoli, corn, and green beans, frozen vegetables matched or exceeded fresh in vitamin C, folate, and beta-carotene content. Fresh spinach loses approximately 50% of its folate within 8 days of harvest, even under refrigeration. Frozen spinach maintains its folate levels far longer because the freezing process arrests the degradation. The real nutrient loss in fresh produce occurs across the entire chain: transit time, warehouse storage, time on the retail shelf, and then however long it sits in your refrigerator at home. Frozen products bypass every single one of those stages. The genuine advantage of truly fresh, locally grown produce consumed the same day is flavor, texture, and the psychological experience of buying it from a person rather than a freezer, not nutrition. You have been paying a premium for the aesthetic experience of fresh, while the guilty freezer bag was quietly winning the nutritional argument the entire time. 6. The microwave sits on your counter like a small appliance you feel mildly guilty about using, as though every minute it runs is stripping vital compounds from your food and leaving behind a glowing, nutritionally hollow husk. People actually feel worse about microwaving vegetables than about boiling them into oblivion, which is one of the more remarkable reversals of culinary logic in recent memory. Microwaving is one of the single best cooking methods available for preserving nutrients, more protective than boiling, often better than roasting, and dramatically faster than both. Nutrient degradation in cooking is driven by two primary forces: heat exposure duration and the leaching of water-soluble vitamins into cooking liquid. Microwaves minimize both. Water-soluble vitamins, particularly vitamin C and the entire B vitamin family, dissolve readily into whatever liquid surrounds the food. When you boil vegetables in a pot of water, those vitamins migrate out of the vegetable and into the water, which you then pour directly down the drain. You have just cooked the nutrients out of your dinner and discarded them. Microwaves generate heat by exciting water molecules within the food itself, cooking it rapidly from the inside out without submerging it in water. A study published in the Journal of the Science of Food and Agriculture found that boiled broccoli lost up to 74% of its glucosinolates, the cancer-associated protective compounds that make broccoli worth eating, while microwaved broccoli, prepared with minimal water, retained the majority of them. The radiation in microwave ovens is non-ionizing. It cannot alter DNA, create radioactive compounds in food, or do anything more alarming than generate heat, which is exactly what an oven does through a different mechanism. The microwave's reputation as a nutritional villain was always a case of blaming the appliance for the quality of what was placed inside it. The microwave is a better steward of your broccoli than your pasta pot ever was. The guilt was entirely misplaced. 7, reaching for the brown sugar packet instead of the white one, feels like a quietly responsible decision. Less processed, more natural, closer to how sugar comes from the earth. People spoon it into their coffee or stir it into their oatmeal with the small private satisfaction of a sensible choice. They are spooning refined white sugar with a cosmetic alteration and calling it a nutritional upgrade. Commercial brown sugar is produced by taking fully refined white sugar and adding back a small quantity of molasses. Approximately 3.5% for light brown sugar, 6.5% for dark brown sugar, primarily to adjust color and introduce a slightly different flavor profile. The molasses is added after refinement. It is not a sign that less refinement occurred. It is a sign that the refinement was completed and then a flavoring agent was reintroduced. Nutritionally, the gap between brown and white sugar is close to invisible. 1 teaspoon of white sugar contains 16 calories and 4.2 grams of sugar. 1 teaspoon of brown sugar contains approximately 17 calories and 4.5 grams. the molasses does contain trace amounts of calcium, iron, and potassium, minerals that are genuinely useful in meaningful quantities. Per teaspoon of brown sugar, you receive amounts so small they are below any threshold of clinical relevance. Raw sugar, turbinado, and demerara are marginally less processed than commercial brown sugar because they retain more of their natural molasses during production, but they remain 95% or more sucrose. Your body metabolizes sucrose from all of these sources identically. Blood glucose response does not change based on the color of the crystal or the font on the packaging. The brown color is doing one job. It is making you feel like you are doing something health conscious while consuming the same molecule at effectively the same dose. That is a branding achievement. It has never been a nutritional one. 8. Himalayan pink salt, Celtic gray salt, fleur de sel. Premium salts have built an entire luxury category around the premise that their trace mineral content delivers something meaningfully different to your body than ordinary table salt. People pay 20 to 40 times the price of standard iodized salt, sprinkling it deliberately, storing it in beautiful containers, and feeling the quiet righteousness of a superior ingredient. What they are buying, chemically, is between 97 and 99% sodium chloride. The same molecule, the same concentration, the same function. Himalayan pink salt gets its distinctive color from iron oxide, which is rust, along with trace amounts of over 80 other minerals. Those minerals are present in concentrations of less than 1% combined. Per serving, the quantities are nutritionally irrelevant. To obtain a meaningful amount of calcium from Himalayan salt, you would need to consume quantities of sodium so extreme they would be acutely dangerous. The math is not in anyone's favor. Here's the part that actually matters. Standard iodized table salt is one of the most consequential public health interventions in recorded history. Iodine deficiency causes goiter and is the leading preventable cause of intellectual disability worldwide. Salt iodization programs, beginning in the United States in the 1920s, eliminated iodine deficiency diseases that had been endemic across large inland populations. Sea salt and artisan salts are not iodized. People who switch entirely to premium salts without compensating through seafood, dairy, or supplementation are quietly increasing their iodine deficiency risk. The World Health Organization identifies sodium as the primary dietary driver of hypertension, regardless of whether that sodium comes from a crystal mined in Pakistan or a grain shaken from a cardboard canister. The taste difference between premium and standard salt is real. Crystal structure and trace mineral compounds do affect flavor. That is a culinary consideration, not a health one. You are paying a luxury price for the same molecule and discarding the one functional nutritional advantage that cheap salt actually had. 9. The word natural on a food package operates as instant absolution. It whispers that you found the good version, the one made by people who care, sourced from somewhere clean, free from the industrial corruption of everything around it on the shelf. People reach for it automatically. They pay more for it without questioning. The word costs the manufacturer nothing to print and carries essentially no regulatory weight whatsoever. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration has no formal regulatory definition for natural as applied to food products. Its informal guidance suggests the term means no artificial or synthetic ingredients were added. But this is not strictly enforced, not third-party verified, and not tied to any defined standard of production, safety, or nutritional quality. The USDA applies natural only to meat and poultry, where it means minimally processed with no artificial ingredients, but says nothing about how the animal was raised, what it was fed, or any aspect of the farming environment. The naturalness of a source material has no relationship to its safety profile. Arsenic is natural. Mercury is natural. Botulinum toxin is produced naturally by bacteria. Lead is a naturally occurring element. Cyanide is manufactured naturally by dozens of plant species. The category of natural includes some of the most acutely toxic substances on Earth. High fructose corn syrup has been successfully marketed as natural by some manufacturers on the basis that it derives from corn, a crop, and the FDA issued warning letters about this without establishing a firm prohibition. A 2015 Consumer Reports survey found that 59% of American consumers actively seek natural labeled products, and the majority believed it guaranteed no pesticides, no GMOs, and no artificial ingredients, none of which the label actually ensures. Products bearing the natural label sell for approximately 20% more on average for a claim that requires no proof and no oversight. The label is a font choice. It is not a certification. Stop letting graphic design run your nutritional decision making. 10. The organic label carries a full mythology, cleaner somehow, more alive, richer in something essential that conventional farming has stripped away. People pay substantial premiums for organic produce, convinced they are absorbing more vitamins, more minerals, more of whatever it is that makes food genuinely nourishing. This belief is an understandable one and a largely unsupported one. The most comprehensive meta-analysis on this topic, published in Annals of Internal Medicine in 2012 by Stanford University researchers examining 237 studies, concluded there was no strong evidence that organic foods are significantly more nutritious than their conventional equivalents. A 2010 review by the UK's Food Standards Agency reached the same conclusion across most nutrient categories. Some studies do find marginally higher levels of certain antioxidants and polyphenols in organically grown crops, potentially because plants stressed by pest pressure produce more defensive compounds. These differences are modest, and their clinical significance is actively debated in the research literature. The genuine evidence-supported benefit of organic food is reduced pesticide residue exposure, a legitimate health consideration particularly for children, pregnant women, and produce items with high pesticide retention like strawberries, spinach, and apples. That is a real reason to choose organic for specific items. It is not a reason to believe organic cookies are a health food. An organic sugar-sweetened snack contains the same sugar, refined flour, and caloric density as a conventional one. The organic certification describes how the ingredients were farmed. It says nothing about what those ingredients do to your body once assembled into a product. The USDA organic seal also prohibits synthetic pesticides while permitting a list of approved natural pesticides, some of which carry their own toxicological profiles. The organic label describes a farming philosophy applied to the source ingredient. It is not a nutrition upgrade applied to the finished product. You have been paying more for the biography of a cookie rather than its content. 11. Gluten became the dietary supervillain of the 2010s, with a speed and comprehensiveness that should itself have been a red flag. Suddenly it was blamed for bloating, brain fog, fatigue, joint pain, and virtually any complaint that hadn't already been attributed to something else. Restaurants advertised its absence as a virtue. Grocery stores built dedicated sections around its elimination. Gluten-free became culturally synonymous with eating responsibly. For approximately 99% of the population, gluten is a completely harmless protein. Celiac disease, a genuine autoimmune condition in which gluten triggers immune-mediated intestinal damage, affects approximately 1% of the global population. For this group, strict, lifelong avoidance is medically essential and genuinely life-altering. Non-celiac gluten sensitivity is a recognized but poorly defined condition. Multiple double-blind placebo-controlled studies, including a landmark 2013 study by Dr. Peter Gibson, who had originally helped identify the condition, found that when FODMAPs, the fermentable carbohydrates present in wheat, were properly controlled for, subjects showed no consistent physiological reaction to gluten itself. The symptom trigger may not be the gluten at all. A 2017 study in the BMJ found that people without celiac disease following low gluten diets may increase their cardiovascular risk, specifically by reducing whole grain intake, a food category with consistent heart health associations in the literature. Many gluten-free packaged products are nutritionally inferior to their whole grain counterparts, lower in fiber, higher in refined starches, and sometimes higher in sodium and sugar added to compensate for the palatability deficit that comes from removing gluten. The global gluten-free food market exceeded $7 billion in 2023, driven overwhelmingly by consumers without celiac disease or any clinical sensitivity. You put a cast on a healthy limb and called it a diet. The industry sold you the cast, the follow-up protocol, and the premium crackers to eat while you recovered from nothing. 12. The detox industry is constructed on a single, remarkably insulting premise: that your body is a backed-up drain requiring an expensive herbal intervention to function. People spend hundreds of dollars on juice programs and detox teas, convinced they are flushing some identifiable accumulation, some visible consequence of modern living that is lodged in their organs and requires commercial intervention to remove. Your body already operates one of the most sophisticated filtration systems ever engineered, and it runs continuously, for free, without a subscription. The liver performs over 500 distinct metabolic functions, filtering blood, metabolizing drugs and alcohol, neutralizing ammonia, and converting toxins into water-soluble compounds for excretion. It processes approximately 1.5 liters of blood per minute. The kidneys filter roughly 200 liters of blood daily, excreting metabolic waste through urine. These are not passive systems. They are active, adaptive, and running at full capacity right now. Detox, as used in marketing, has no agreed scientific definition. No detox product manufacturer has ever been required to identify which specific toxins their product removes, from which organ, via what mechanism, or in what measurable quantity. These are not disclosed because they do not exist as documented effects. Most detox teas contain senna, a potent laxative herb, which produces the dramatic cleansing sensation users interpret as toxin elimination. They are experiencing pharmacologically induced diarrhea. The British Dietetic Association formally classified detox diets as a marketing myth, stating that no credible scientific evidence supports their efficacy. Some commercially sold detox supplements contain herbs documented as hepatotoxic, damaging to the liver, and there are published case reports of liver failure from detox products. You paid a company to do nothing your liver was not already doing. In some cases, you paid them to damage the organ you believed you were protecting. The only toxin with a documented presence throughout this transaction was the marketing. 13. The 8 p.m. food curfew is delivered with the confidence of a physical law, as though crossing that temporal threshold with a snack recategorizes whatever you just ate directly into adipose tissue because the metabolism clocks out when the sun goes down. People set phone alarms for it. They refuse food after that hour with the discipline of someone following doctor's orders, which is impressive given that the rule has no meaningful clinical basis. Your metabolism does not own a clock. Calories consumed at 9 p.m. are processed through the same biological machinery as calories consumed at 9 a.m. The total energy content does not change. The macronutrient composition does not change. The body's capacity to metabolize them does not disappear after dark. Circadian biology does influence metabolic efficiency to a modest degree. Insulin sensitivity is marginally higher earlier in the day, and some research suggests evening meals may produce slightly different hormonal responses in certain contexts. These effects are real and modest and largely irrelevant for weight management in most people's actual lives. The real correlation between late-night eating and weight gain is behavioral, not metabolic. Evening is when people eat in front of screens, consume high-calorie processed snacks out of boredom rather than hunger, and make choices they would not make at noon with the same level of awareness. A 2020 study in Obesity Reviews confirmed that when total caloric intake was controlled, meal timing had minimal independent effect on body weight or composition in the general population. Shift workers who eat late by conventional standards do not gain weight at elevated rates from their timing alone when total intake and food quality are comparable. The 8 p.m. rule likely began as reasonable advice to avoid mindless evening snacking, which does correlate with overeating. That was simplified into a time-based prohibition and then mistaken for metabolic science. The bowl of cereal you ate at 10 p.m. did not know what time it was. Only you did. That awareness changed nothing about how it was metabolized. 14. For 3 decades, the egg yolk was treated as a yellow cholesterol grenade. A dietary hazard requiring containment. People threw it away with the earnest discipline of someone following a clinical prescription, ate their joyless egg white omelets, and felt morally responsible for the sacrifice. The demonization of egg yolks was based on fundamentally flawed science that the medical community has, over time, substantially walked back. Dietary cholesterol and blood cholesterol are not the same variable operating through the same mechanism. The liver produces roughly 75% of the body's cholesterol endogenously. When dietary cholesterol intake rises, hepatic synthesis decreases proportionally, a process called cholesterol homeostasis. And when dietary intake drops, synthesis increases to compensate. The body actively defends a set point. For approximately 2/3 of the population, this means eating eggs barely affects blood cholesterol levels at all. The 1968 American Heart Association guidelines that launched the war on dietary cholesterol were based on research that confounded saturated fat and cholesterol consumption simultaneously, making it impossible to isolate which variable was responsible for elevated blood lipid levels. A 2019 meta-analysis in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that consuming up to 1 egg per day was not associated with increased cardiovascular risk in healthy individuals. The 2015 U.S. Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee quietly removed the specific numerical cap on dietary cholesterol it had maintained since 1977, stating that cholesterol is not a nutrient of concern for overconsumption, a conclusion that arrived roughly 50 years after the guidelines began. Egg yolks contain choline, essential for brain function and liver health, which approximately 90% of Americans do not consume in adequate amounts. They contain lutein and zeaxanthin, among the most evidence-supported nutrients for preventing macular degeneration. You spent decades discarding the most nutritionally complete part of the egg to protect yourself from a threat that nutrition science has since revised, retracted, and buried in a footnote. 15. High fructose corn syrup became the food villain of the 2000s with an intensity that bordered on moral panic. People checked labels for it the way you might check a contract for hidden clauses, convinced that this one specific ingredient was uniquely and categorically responsible for the obesity epidemic, fundamentally different from ordinary sugar in some critical biochemical way that made it especially dangerous. It is not. High fructose corn syrup and table sugar are chemically close enough to be called near identical in any practical context. Table sugar, sucrose, is a disaccharide composed of 50% fructose and 50% glucose bonded together. The most common food-grade high fructose corn syrup, HFCS 55, used predominantly in soft drinks, is 55% fructose and 45% glucose. Unbonded, but metabolically indistinguishable once consumed. The body cleaves the sucrose bond during digestion using the enzyme sucrase, producing free fructose and glucose, the same metabolic endpoint as HFCS. Both fructose forms are metabolized primarily in the liver. At excessive intake levels, both can contribute to hepatic fat accumulation, elevated triglycerides, and insulin resistance through these same biochemical pathways. High fructose corn syrup became dominant in the U.S. food supply during the 1970s and 80s, not because of any metabolic superiority, but because corn subsidies made it economically advantageous for food manufacturers. It was a cost decision dressed up as an ingredient. Blaming HFCS while exonerating sucrose is the nutritional equivalent of declaring one brand of cigarette safe while blaming a second brand for lung cancer. Same mechanism, same dose-dependent outcomes. The global obesity trend correlates with increased total caloric intake and broad sugar consumption, not with HFCS specifically. Countries with minimal HFCS use but high sucrose consumption show equivalent metabolic disease trajectories. You boycotted one type of sugar while consuming the other without question. The problem was never the name, it was always the quantity. 16. At the first sniffle, millions of people reach for vitamin C supplements, effervescent tablets, or aggressively large glasses of orange juice, armed with the settled conviction that they are deploying a scientifically validated intervention against the common cold. Linus Pauling said so, your grandmother confirmed it. 2 Nobel Prizes and a folk remedy tradition make a persuasive combination, but the clinical evidence has never matched the reputation. Vitamin C does not prevent colds in the general population, and its effect on duration is real but modest, averaging roughly half-a-day reduction across a typical week-long illness. Nobel Prize-winning chemist Linus Pauling promoted megadose vitamin C therapy between 1 and 18 grams daily. In his 1970 book, generating enormous public enthusiasm and decades of commercial momentum. His methodology was later extensively criticized for selection bias and absence of rigorous controls. The most comprehensive Cochrane review on vitamin C and the Common Cold, updated in 2013 and covering 29 trials with over 11,000 participants, found that regular supplementation does not reduce cold incidence in the general population. In subgroups experiencing extreme physical stress, marathon runners, soldiers in subarctic conditions, competitive skiers, regular supplementation showed approximately 50% reduction in cold incidence. This finding does not generalize to ordinary life. For the general population, supplementation reduced cold duration by approximately 8% in adults, roughly half a day on a week-long illness, statistically detectable. Clinically marginal. Vitamin C is genuinely essential for immune function, collagen synthesis, and antioxidant activity, but at dietary levels, not megadose levels. The body saturates its absorption capacity at around 400 milligrams per day and excretes excess through urine. Orange juice, the preferred delivery vehicle, contains enough sugar that its net immune contribution is complicated, as high sugar intake temporarily impairs white blood cell function. You are chasing half a day of recovery with a supplement regime built on a chemist's enthusiasm applied outside his area of expertise. Take it if you want. Stop calling it medicine. 17. MSG has been on an informal food ban for 6 decades. People inspect ingredient labels for it with a vigilance usually reserved for actual allergens. Restaurants advertise its absence as a health credential. The phrase, "no MSG," appears on menus and packaging as though it represents a significant concession to your well-being. The entire panic traces back to a single letter published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 1968, in which Dr. Robert Ho Man Kwok described symptoms he had experienced after eating at Chinese restaurants: numbness, general weakness, heart palpitations, and speculated, without any study or controlled observation, that the cause might be MSG, sodium, or cooking wine. He did not conduct research. He wrote a letter based on personal experience at dinner. Chinese restaurant syndrome became a media phenomenon almost immediately, and the racialized framing of the panic is not incidental. MSG was equally present in canned soups, potato chips, fast food, and an enormous range of processed Western foods, none of which received comparable scrutiny or generated comparable consumer anxiety. Glutamate, the G in MSG, is an amino acid present in high concentrations, naturally in Parmesan cheese, tomatoes, mushrooms, soy sauce, and anchovies. Your body produces glutamate endogenously. It cannot distinguish between glutamate from MSG and glutamate from a sun-dried tomato. Multiple rigorous double-blind placebo-controlled trials have failed to demonstrate that MSG causes symptoms in self-identified sensitive individuals when sodium levels are properly controlled and blinding is maintained. The FDA classifies MSG as generally recognized as safe. The European Food Safety Authority, the WHO, and virtually every major food safety regulatory body worldwide have reached the same conclusion. Some individuals may show responses to very large doses in controlled settings, but the quantities involved far exceed normal food preparation. 6 decades of avoiding a flavor molecule found naturally in Parmesan, based on one man's letter about dinner, and the science never supported the panic. Only the momentum did. 18. The soy destroys masculinity panic lives at the intersection of fitness culture and online health anxiety, and it has turned tofu, soy milk, and edamame into threats requiring active avoidance by men who have absorbed the idea that plant proteins are somehow hormone-disrupting agents working against them. Human clinical evidence says otherwise. Consuming normal dietary amounts of soy has no significant effect on testosterone levels, sperm count, or any conventional marker of male hormonal health. Soy contains phytoestrogens, specifically isoflavones, which are plant compounds capable of binding weakly to estrogen receptors. The operative word is weakly. Their binding affinity is approximately 100 to 1,000 times lower than endogenous estrogen, and phytoestrogens can produce either estrogenic or anti-estrogenic effects depending on the tissue type and the body's existing hormonal environment. They do not simply flood the system with estrogen. A 2021 meta-analysis in reproductive toxicology reviewing 41 studies found no significant effect of soy or isoflavone consumption on testosterone, estrogen, or other reproductive hormone levels in men. The single most cited case used to support the feminizing effects narrative involved a man who developed breast tissue growth after consuming approximately 3 liters of soy milk per day, an intake roughly 10 to 20 times higher than typical consumption. This is a toxicological outlier, not a dietary reference point. East Asian populations have consumed soy as a dietary staple for thousands of years. Japan, South Korea, and China rank among the world's highest soy-consuming nations and show no population-level disruptions in male hormonal health attributable to soy intake. Here's the detail that deserves its own moment. Hops, used to brew beer, a beverage with an exceedingly strong association with conventional masculinity, also contain phytoestrogens and have been linked in some studies to hormonal effects at high consumption levels. The men most concerned about soy were frequently drinking the more relevant product the entire time. 19. The WHO's 2015 announcement that red meat is a carcinogen was treated in popular culture as a settled verdict. Red meat equals cancer, full stop, equivalent risk to cigarettes, case closed. People forwarded the headlines without the context, and the context is doing an enormous amount of work in this story. The WHO's International Agency for Research on Cancer classified processed meat as Group 1, sufficient evidence of causing cancer in humans, and unprocessed red meat as Group 2A, meaning probably carcinogenic. These classifications describe the strength of the available evidence, not the magnitude of the risk. Group 1 also contains plutonium, tobacco, and alcohol, but consuming one alcoholic drink and smoking a pack of cigarettes do not carry remotely comparable absolute risks. The classification system is not a risk equivalence ranking. The absolute risk increase from processed meat consumption is approximately an 18% relative increase in colorectal cancer risk per 50 grams consumed daily. In absolute terms, this raises lifetime colorectal cancer risk from roughly 5% to approximately 6%. Real, worth knowing. Not equivalent to tobacco's risk profile, the mechanisms under investigation involve hemi-iron, abundant in red meat, which may promote formation of harmful nitrogen compounds in the colon, heterocyclic amines, and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons formed during high heat cooking, and nitrates added to processed meats. Cooking method matters considerably here. Slow-cooked, lower-temperature preparation produces far fewer carcinogenic compounds than high-heat char grilling or frying. The steak and the char marks on the steak are separate conversations. Epidemiological data consistently shows that overall dietary pattern, fiber intake, vegetable consumption, and lifestyle factors including exercise, smoking, and alcohol use strongly modify whatever baseline contribution red meat makes to cancer risk. The headline said, "Red meat causes cancer." The actual science said, the dose, the preparation, the context, and your overall dietary pattern all matter enormously. One of those fits on a shareable graphic. Neither is the complete picture. 20. Milk and bone health are presented as biologically inseparable. A partnership so fundamental it starts in school cafeterias and continues through every dairy industry advertisement ever produced. The implication is structural. No milk, no bones, essentially. The relationship between dairy consumption and fracture risk is far weaker than decades of marketing suggest, and some of the highest dairy-consuming populations on Earth have the highest fracture rates in the world. The calcium hypothesis of bone health positions. Calcium intake is the primary determinant of bone density, which is a significant oversimplification. Bone strength depends on a system of factors: vitamin D, which is required for calcium absorption, vitamin K2, which directs calcium toward bone rather than arterial walls, magnesium, phosphorus, weight-bearing physical activity, and hormonal health. The Harvard Nurses' Health Study, which tracked over 77,000 women for 12 years, found no association between dairy consumption and reduced hip fracture risk. Women who consume more dairy did not have measurably stronger bones by this metric. Countries with the highest dairy consumption, including the United States, Sweden, Finland, and New Zealand, consistently rank among those with the highest rates of hip fractures and osteoporosis globally. Countries with lower dairy consumption, including Japan and most of sub-Saharan Africa, show lower hip fracture rates. This pattern likely reflects overall dietary and lifestyle context. High dairy consumption often co-occurs with low physical activity, low vitamin D status in northern latitudes, and low vegetable intake. Vitamin D is required for calcium absorption, and without adequate levels, even high calcium intake is poorly utilized. An estimated 41% of U.S. adults are vitamin D deficient. Calcium is available in meaningful quantities from kale, bok choy, fortified plant milks, sardines, salmon with bones, calcium-set tofu, and white beans. Milk is a source of calcium. It was never the only one, and the advertisement was never the complete story. 21. Post-workout nutrition has been ritualized to an almost devotional degree in gym culture. The anabolic window, a narrow 30-minute period after training during which protein must be consumed or muscle will atrophy, has sold enormous volumes of protein powder and driven people to choke down shakes in parking lots rather than wait for an actual meal. The window is real. The emergency attached to it is a commercial invention. Muscle protein synthesis does spike after resistance training, but it remains elevated for 24 to 48 hours, not 30 minutes. The 30-minute window concept emerged from research on post-exercise physiology that was then radically compressed and weaponized by supplement marketing into an urgent product-requiring deadline. A 2013 meta-analysis by Aragon and Schoenfeld in the Journal of the International Society of Sports Nutrition found that once pre-workout protein intake was controlled for, post-workout protein timing showed minimal additional effect on muscle hypertrophy outcomes. If you ate a protein-containing meal 1 to 2 hours before training, amino acids are still circulating. Muscle protein synthesis is already supported. The alleged emergency does not exist in that scenario. Total daily protein intake, distributed reasonably across meals, is the primary driver of muscle protein synthesis. Research supports approximately 1.5 to 2.25 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight daily as the effective range for optimizing hypertrophy. And this effect is driven by daily totals, not by the precision of the post-workout timestamp. The supplement industry has a direct financial interest in perpetuating the urgency of the window. A deadline that expires in 30 minutes requires a portable, convenient, immediately accessible product. A chicken breast you eat at dinner does not generate the same commercial pressure. Elite athletes optimizing every variable do benefit from precise nutrient timing. People doing moderate gym training several times a week benefit primarily from eating enough total protein across the day. Your muscles are not on a countdown timer. 22. Zero-calorie sweeteners seem like an engineering triumph. All the sweetness, none of the metabolic cost, a clean workaround to the calorie system that biology had previously made non-negotiable. Diet soda, sugar-free yogurt, and sweetener packets became the infrastructure of countless weight reduction strategies. The logic was airtight. The long-term outcomes were not consistently what the logic predicted. The evidence on artificial sweeteners and weight management is genuinely mixed, and several proposed mechanisms suggest they may undermine the specific goal they are marketed to support. Randomized controlled trials show inconsistent results. Some find modest weight loss advantages when artificial sweeteners directly replace sugar calories. Others show no significant benefit or associations with weight gain over longer observational periods. One proposed mechanism involves the cephalic phase response. The body initiates metabolic preparation for caloric intake when it detects sweetness, releasing insulin and related hormones. When calories do not follow, some research suggests this may increase appetite and drive cravings for calorie-dense foods. A 2017 analysis in the Canadian Medical Association Journal, examining 37 studies of artificial sweetener consumption, found no consistent evidence of weight loss benefit and some association with higher body mass index, hypertension, and metabolic syndrome in long-term observational data. A 2022 randomized trial, published in Cell, found that saccharin and sucralose significantly altered gut microbiome composition and impaired glucose response in some participants. Behavioral compensation is a well-documented phenomenon. People who consume diet beverages frequently increase caloric intake from food, rationalizing it against their saved beverage calories. None of this makes artificial sweeteners acutely dangerous for most people. They offer a genuine practical advantage for diabetics managing blood glucose spikes, and that is a legitimate and specific use case. But they are not a reliable or straightforward weight management tool. You found a loophole in the calorie system, and your brain found a loophole in your loophole. The body is extraordinarily good at restoring the equilibrium you were attempting to escape. 23, for decades, margarine was the prescribed alternative. The heart-healthy substitute that cardiologists recommended, governments promoted, and nutrition guidelines enshrined as the sensible replacement for butter. The saturated fat in butter was the enemy, and margarine was the solution. This was one of the most consequential and consequentially wrong dietary recommendations of the 20th century. Traditional margarine was loaded with trans fats, the single most harmful dietary fat ever identified. The health food was measurably worse than the food it replaced. Margarine is produced through hydrogenation, a process that adds hydrogen atoms to liquid vegetable oils to make them solid at room temperature. A byproduct of partial hydrogenation is the creation of trans fatty acids, which raise LDL cholesterol, lower HDL cholesterol, and increase cardiovascular disease risk through a dual mechanism that saturated fat does not match. Harvard researchers estimated that trans fat consumption was responsible for approximately 30,000 to 100,000 premature cardiovascular deaths annually in the United States at peak margarine consumption. The American Heart Association's recommendation of margarine over butter was based on the saturated fat hypothesis, which, as established earlier in this list, was derived from flawed research. Meanwhile, trans fats were not independently examined for cardiovascular effects until decades after the recommendation was in place. The FDA did not ban partially hydrogenated oils, the primary source of industrial trans fats, until 2015, with full compliance required by 2018. That is approximately 50 years after the public was first instructed to switch from butter to margarine. Most commercial margarines have since been reformulated to reduce or eliminate trans fats. Modern soft margarines made with non-hydrogenated oils are a different product from their mid-century predecessors. Butter contains saturated fat, which carries a nuanced cardiovascular risk profile, but no trans fats in its natural state. The medical establishment told you to discard a natural food and replace it with a manufactured one. The manufactured one was worse. The lesson was expensive. At least it is on the label now. 24. A calorie is a calorie. This phrase is the reductionist comfort blanket of people who want nutrition to be simple and clean. Eat less than you burn. Every calorie from every source behaves identically inside the body. This is a useful directional framework and an incomplete description of how your biology actually processes food. The source and composition of calories dramatically affects satiety, hormonal response, metabolic rate, and long-term body composition in ways the simple equation was never designed to capture. The thermic effect of food differs substantially by macronutrient. Protein requires 20 to 30% of its own caloric value to digest and metabolize. Carbohydrates require 5 to 10%. Fat requires near 0 to 3%. Eating 100 calories of protein leaves the body with fewer net calories available than eating 100 calories of fat or refined carbohydrate. Protein is also the most satiating macronutrient, suppressing ghrelin and increasing satiety hormones to a greater extent than equivalent calories from other sources. A 2004 study in JAMA found that among 3 groups eating different macronutrient ratios at the same caloric deficit, the higher protein group retained more lean mass and lost more fat, despite identical caloric intake across all 3 groups. A 2019 NIH randomized trial found that participants ate an average of 500 more calories per day when given unlimited access to ultra-processed food compared to minimally processed food, even when the nutritional content was matched on paper. 100 calories of fructose, metabolized primarily in the liver, and 100 calories of glucose, metabolized throughout the body, produce measurably different hepatic, insulinogenic, and lipogenic outcomes. The quality, fiber content, protein density, and processing level of food shape what those calories do to your hunger, your hormones, and your body composition. Not just whether they balance a ledger. A calorie is a unit of measurement. It is not a biological instruction. What you eat after counting it determines what your body actually does next. 25 stomach ulcers and spicy food have been linked in popular understanding for so long and with such confidence that people with any digestive complaint are reflexively told to eliminate heat from their diet entirely. It burns going in. Surely it must be burning the lining on the way down. The intuition is understandable. The biology contradicts it almost entirely. Stomach ulcers are caused by a bacterial infection in a category of widely used over-the-counter medications. Spicy food did not create them, and the medical community spent most of a century prescribing solutions to a problem while misidentifying its cause. In 1982, Australian physicians Barry Marshall and Robin Warren identified Helicobacter pylori as the primary cause of peptic ulcers. The scientific establishment initially rejected their findings with considerable resistance, so committed was the prevailing consensus to dietary and psychological causes. Marshall famously consumed a solution containing H. pylori, developed gastritis, and treated himself with antibiotics to demonstrate causation directly. He and Warren received the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 2005. Approximately 70 to 90% of peptic ulcers are caused by H. pylori infection. The remaining 10 to 30% are caused primarily by NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs including ibuprofen and aspirin, which damage the stomach's protective mucosal lining through a different mechanism entirely. Capsaicin, the active compound in chili peppers, does not damage the stomach lining in people without pre-existing ulcers. In people who already have ulcers or active inflammation, capsaicin can exacerbate symptoms by stimulating gastric acid secretion and irritating compromised tissue. This is irritation of a pre-existing condition, not causation of a new one. A distinction with significant practical implications. Capsaicin has shown gastroprotective properties in some research, stimulating mucus secretion and promoting blood flow to gastric tissue at normal dietary doses. We banned the ingredient that did not cause the problem and missed the bacterium that did for most of a century. The ibuprofen bottle is still unsupervised on your nightstand. 6 small meals a day became the metabolic optimization gospel of fitness culture throughout the 2000s. A strategy premised on the idea that frequent eating keeps the metabolic furnace burning at elevated efficiency, that skipping too long between meals allows the fire to go cold, and that distributing intake across 6 windows rather than 3 would produce meaningfully superior outcomes. The thermic effect of food is proportional to total calories consumed, not to the number of eating occasions across a day. Splitting 2,400 calories into 6 400-calorie meals generates the same total thermic effect as splitting those same 2,400 calories into 2 1,200-calorie meals. The furnace burns based on total fuel. It does not track the schedule. The concept of metabolic starvation mode from skipping meals, the dramatic metabolic collapse feared from going too long between eating occasions, does not occur across the time frame between normal meals or even across a full day of fasting in healthy individuals. Adaptive thermogenesis, a genuine reduction in resting metabolic rate in response to sustained caloric restriction, requires days to weeks of caloric deficit to manifest meaningfully, not hours without a snack. A 2010 review in the British Journal of Nutrition found no significant metabolic advantage of increased meal frequency in controlled studies when total calories and macronutrients were matched across conditions. The meal frequency that produces results for body composition is the frequency that allows you to manage hunger effectively, maintain adequate total protein intake, and sustain the pattern consistently over time. For some people, this is 6 eating occasions per day. For others, it is 2. Neither is metabolically superior in isolation. The 6-meal strategy was popularized with considerable enthusiasm by the fitness supplement industry, which had a direct financial interest in creating pre-workout, post-workout, mid-morning, and mid-afternoon nutrition windows that each required a convenient, portable product. Your metabolism is a furnace burning based on total fuel loaded. The schedule is yours. The metabolism was never tracking it. 27. Fruit juice occupies the obviously fine category in most households with a certainty that feels inherited rather than examined. It is fruit. It came from something natural. It is given to children in the morning as a vehicle for vitamin C and reassurance. What it actually is, nutritionally, is sugar water without the single most important structural feature that makes fruit worth eating. And its glycemic impact sits closer to a soft drink than to the whole fruit it supposedly represents. An 8-ounce glass of orange juice contains approximately 21 grams of sugar, nearly identical to a can of cola per equivalent serving. The sugar is naturally occurring, primarily fructose and glucose, rather than added, but the body's metabolic response to it is comparable because the mechanism of delivery is the same. The critical difference between whole fruit and juice is fiber. Dietary fiber slows glucose absorption, blunts the insulin response, promotes satiety, feeds beneficial gut bacteria, and regulates the rate at which sugar enters the bloodstream. Juicing removes the fiber entirely. Without it, juice produces a rapid blood glucose spike followed by a rapid drop, the physiological pattern that drives subsequent hunger and cravings for more. A 2013 study in the British Medical Journal, following over 187,000 adults, found that consuming whole fruits was associated with reduced risk of type 2 diabetes, while fruit juice consumption was associated with increased risk. Many commercial products labeled 100% fruit juice are made from concentrate. Juice is dehydrated for shipping efficiency, then reconstituted with water and flavor packs added to restore the taste lost during processing. This is legal and standard practice. Vitamin C content in commercial juice declines significantly after opening as the liquid is exposed to air and light. You remove the structural health advantage of the fruit, called what remained a health drink, and served it at breakfast. The marketing team named it sensibly. Your pancreas has a different opinion. 28. Superfoods arrive with the cultural weight of pharmaceutical announcements. Acai, spirulina, moringa, maca root, goji berries. Each one appears trailing claims about antioxidant capacity, immune enhancement, cognitive sharpening, or anti-aging properties that position them closer to medication than food. The term superfood has no scientific or regulatory definition. It is a marketing category, not a nutritional classification, and the mundane, affordable foods already in your grocery store are frequently more nutritious than the exotic premium imports they are compared against to justify the price difference. The European Union has banned superfood as a marketing claim on food products unless accompanied by a specific, authorized health claim backed by documented scientific evidence. No equivalent ban exists in the United States. ORASC scores, oxygen radical absorbance capacity, were the metric most commonly used to justify superfood status by measuring antioxidant capacity in a laboratory setting. The USDA withdrew its ORAC database in 2012, formally noting it was being misleadingly applied in food marketing because antioxidant activity in the human body is tightly regulated and does not scale proportionally with dietary antioxidant intake. Goji berries, frequently cited as exceptional antioxidant sources, contain comparable antioxidant levels to ordinary blueberries, pomegranate seeds, and dried prunes, foods available at a fraction of the cost. Spirulina is genuinely nutrient dense, but the quantities present in a standard supplement dose of 1 to 3 grams deliver negligible amounts of any specific nutrient compared to a simple serving of leafy greens. The superfood pattern consistently involves an exotic origin story that supports a price premium, ORAC adjacent marketing language, and a wellness or celebrity endorsement. Dietary diversity, a wide variety of whole plant foods consumed regularly, outperforms any single marketed food in population-level health outcomes across every major nutritional guideline. The kale in your refrigerator is not nutritionally inferior because it did not travel internationally. Nutritional value has never required an origin story or a following. 29. The connection between dietary cholesterol and blood cholesterol was presented as a straightforward causal chain for 50 years. Cholesterol in food equals cholesterol in blood equals cardiovascular disease risk. It sent generations into a low cholesterol panic that shaped diets, reformulated food products, and informed medical guidelines worldwide. The equation was always too simple, and the evidence supporting it was always thinner than the guidelines built on top of it. The body produces approximately 800 to 1500 milligrams of cholesterol daily through endogenous synthesis, primarily in the liver, but also in the intestines, adrenal glands, and other tissues. Cholesterol is an essential structural molecule used to build cell membranes, synthesize steroid hormones, and produce bile acids. The liver operates a compensatory feedback loop. When dietary cholesterol intake rises, hepatic synthesis decreases proportionally. When dietary intake drops, synthesis increases to compensate. The body actively maintains a set point. For approximately 2/3 of the population classified as hypo-responders, blood cholesterol barely changes with substantial variations in dietary cholesterol intake. About 1/3 are hyperresponders who show more pronounced reactions, though even in this group, both LDL and HDL typically rise together, maintaining the ratio between them. The dietary guidelines cap on cholesterol, 300 milligrams per day, that shaped food policy from the 1970s onward, was removed by the 2015 Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee, which concluded that cholesterol is not a nutrient of concern for overconsumption. Saturated fat and trans fat have far more consistent and significant effects on blood LDL levels than dietary cholesterol, a nuance entirely lost in the decades-long simplification of the message. Foods naturally high in cholesterol, eggs, shellfish, organ meats, are nutritionally dense in protein, micronutrients, and omega-3 fatty acids. Removing them based on a flawed hypothesis carried genuine costs. You are avoiding a molecule your own body produces in quantities that dwarf your dietary contribution, based on guidelines quietly retired after half a century. 30. The raw food movement is built on a premise that sounds biologically intuitive. Cooking is nutritional damage, an act of vandalism against the living enzymes and delicate compounds present in unprocessed food. Raw produce carries an aura of purity that cooked food apparently forfeits the moment heat is applied. The science does not support blanket raw superiority, and in several important categories, it supports the opposite conclusion. Cooking increases the bioavailability of many key nutrients, the proportion that is actually absorbed and utilized by the body, by breaking down cellulose cell walls that would otherwise protect those nutrients from digestion. Lycopene, a powerful antioxidant associated with reduced prostate and cardiovascular disease risk, is significantly more bioavailable in cooked tomatoes than raw ones. Studies show bioavailability increases by approximately 2.5 to 3.5 times after cooking, particularly when combined with a small amount of dietary fat. Beta-carotene in carrots is substantially more bioavailable cooked than raw, with research suggesting roughly 3 times higher absorption from cooked versus raw carrots. The argument central to raw food ideology, that cooking destroys vital enzymes present in food, is scientifically unfounded. Digestive enzymes present in raw food are denatured by the stomach's acidic environment, regardless of whether the food was previously cooked. The human digestive system provides its own enzymes. plant enzymes are not systematically incorporated into your metabolism after consumption. Some nutrients are genuinely reduced by heat. Vitamin C and folate are heat-sensitive and water-soluble, making brief low-water cooking methods superior to prolonged boiling for these specific compounds. Cooking also destroys or inactivates anti-nutritional compounds present in many raw foods, oxalates in spinach that bind calcium and iron, lectins in beans that are toxic at high raw intake levels, and goitrogens in cruciferous vegetables that can interfere with thyroid function in large quantities. Cooking is not what stripped the nutrition from your food. It is part of why your ancestors had the cognitive capacity to worry about nutrition at all. 31. Diet soda occupies the category of the perfect compromise. The taste of indulgence with none of the caloric consequence. 0 calories, 0 guilt. It has been the default beverage of dieters for 4 decades, held up as proof that you can have the experience without paying the metabolic price. The Zero is doing an enormous amount of work in that pitch, and the long-term evidence is considerably less reassuring than the label implies. Multiple large observational studies show a counterintuitive positive association between diet soda consumption and obesity, metabolic syndrome, and type 2 diabetes. The relationship is not straightforwardly causal. Heavier individuals may preferentially choose diet beverages. But the association persists across multiple independent datasets in ways that warrant more than dismissal. The 2022 EPIC study, a large European prospective cohort, found that both regular and artificially sweetened soft drink consumption were associated with increased mortality risk, though confounding factors remain difficult to fully exclude at this scale. A 2023 WHO review concluded there is no evidence that non-sugar sweeteners help with long-term weight management, and noted potential associations with increased risk of type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease with sustained use, while acknowledging the evidence base is still developing. Caramel coloring used in cola-type beverages contains 4-methylimidazole, classified as a possible carcinogen by IARC, present in both regular and diet versions. Phosphoric acid common in cola formulations has been linked in some studies to reduce bone mineral density in women and to dental enamel erosion with regular consumption. For diabetics managing blood glucose responses, diet soda does offer a practical short-term advantage over regular soda. This is a specific narrow use case, not a general health endorsement. 0 calories was never the whole contract. You agreed to the number on the label without reading the remaining terms. The can was honest about one figure, it was considerably less forthcoming about the others. 32. The calorie number on a nutrition label projects an air of scientific precision that feels authoritative and trustworthy. People track them to the digit with the confidence of someone working from verified data. 247 calories, 183 calories. These numbers feel like facts. They are legally permitted approximations based on a 19th century methodology that does not account for how your specific body processes a specific food. The Atwater system, used to calculate food calories by burning food in a bomb calorimeter and measuring heat release, was developed in the 1890s. It assigns 4 calories per gram to protein and carbohydrate and 9 calories per gram to fat. These are population average values that do not account for individual metabolic variation or food structure. The FDA permits a 20% margin of error on food label calorie declarations. A product labeled 200 calories could legally contain 240. When you are tracking calories to the unit, this margin is not trivial. It compounds across every meal and every day. Cooking dramatically changes caloric extraction in ways the label cannot reflect. Cooking gelatinizes starches and denatures proteins, making them substantially more digestible. A raw sweet potato and a cooked sweet potato may carry identical labels, but deliver measurably different bioavailable calories to the person eating them. Dietary fiber is officially assigned 4 calories per gram in the Atwater system, but fiber is largely indigestible by human enzymes. Gut bacteria ferment some of it into short-chain fatty acids, but actual energy yield from fiber is roughly 1.5 to 2.5 calories per gram, meaningfully less than labeled. Almonds provide approximately 20% fewer calories than their labels suggest because intact cell walls resist complete lipid extraction during digestion. Individual gut microbiome composition affects caloric extraction efficiency, meaning two people eating identical meals may absorb meaningfully different quantities of energy based on their microbial populations. The label points you in a direction. It was never designed to deliver a verdict. 33 neon-colored sports drinks have colonized the hydration conversation with a thoroughness that suggests they are solving a universal physiological problem. The electrolyte narrative is powerful. Sweat looks like a crisis that requires a product. And the products are positioned in every gym, every checkout line, every vending machine adjacent to physical activity. For the vast majority of people doing workouts under an hour at moderate intensity, water is nutritionally equivalent to sports drinks for hydration, and the sports drink adds sugar and calories that can functionally negate the exercise just completed. Sports drinks were formulated in the 1960s to address electrolyte and glycogen depletion in elite athletes during prolonged high-intensity exercise exceeding 60 to 90 minutes. The original research context, University of Florida football players training in extreme heat, does not generalize to a 45-minute gym session in a climate-controlled building. A typical sports drink contains 14 to 17 grams of sugar per 12 ounces, roughly 60 to 70 calories. For someone burning 300 calories during a moderate workout, consuming 2 sports drinks during or after the session eliminates most of the caloric deficit created. Electrolyte replacement becomes genuinely relevant after extended sweating, approximately 60 to 90 minutes of sustained moderate to vigorous exercise in warm conditions. For shorter sessions, dietary sodium from regular meals replaces what was lost in sweat without any intervention required. Coconut water, frequently marketed as the natural sports drink, has low sodium content, the primary electrolyte lost in sweat, making it less effective than commercial sports drinks for actual electrolyte replacement and more expensive than water for basic hydration. The sports drink market generates over $9 billion annually in the United States. The demographic driving that revenue is predominantly recreational gym goers and weekend athletes, not the elite endurance athletes the product was specifically engineered to support. You drank the solution designed for a completely different problem. The product was built for a cyclist doing 6 hours in summer heat. You did a spin class. Water was always sufficient. 34 agave nectar arrived in wellness culture with an impeccable resume. Plant-derived, low glycemic index, natural, positioned as the sophisticated alternative for people who had outgrown white sugar. It appeared in health food stores, artisanal products, and clean eating guides as the virtuous sweetener. Its low glycemic index status was the headline. The mechanism producing that low glycemic index was the asterisk almost no one read. Commercial agave syrup contains 70 to 90% fructose, significantly higher than the table sugar at 50% fructose and higher than high fructose corn syrup at 55%. Its low glycemic index is a direct consequence of this extreme fructose concentration, because fructose does not raise blood glucose directly, but this is not the metabolic advantage it appears to be on first reading. Fructose is metabolized almost exclusively in the liver. Unlike glucose, which is distributed across virtually all cells in the body for energy, fructose enters a pathway in the liver called de novo lipogenesis, which produces fat, specifically triglycerides and very low-density lipoprotein particles. High fructose intake is associated with increased hepatic fat accumulation, elevated triglycerides, insulin resistance, and visceral adiposity, independent of total caloric intake, across multiple controlled studies. Agave syrup is also a highly processed product. Raw agave juice contains very little of the fructose-rich syrup sold commercially. The cactus is heated and enzymatically treated to convert its primary carbohydrates into fructose. The natural origin story is real. The natural product is not what ends up in the bottle. The low glycemic positioning exploits a genuine gap in public understanding. Most people assume low glycemic index means healthier for blood sugar management, not that the sugar is bypassing blood glucose regulation entirely by going directly to the liver instead. Diabetics who seek low glycemic sweeteners may be particularly misled, as the elevated fructose load creates a different category of metabolic problem than the blood glucose spike it successfully avoids. You traded the sugar that enters your blood for the sugar that goes to your liver. 35. Your immune system is not a volume dial with a boost setting, and the phrase immune boosting, printed on supplements, teas, juices, and functional foods across the wellness industry, does not correspond to any coherent biological goal. The immune system is not a single entity that benefits from amplification. It is a complex dynamic network of cells, tissues, and signaling molecules that requires precise calibration, not more output. An overactive immune system is not a health asset. It is the mechanism behind autoimmune diseases, including rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, lupus, and type 1 diabetes. A genuinely boosted immune system in the amplified sense would be dangerous. Vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc, elderberry, and echinacea, the most heavily marketed immune supplements, have evidence supporting their role in correcting nutritional deficiencies that impair immune function. Supplementing beyond sufficiency in healthy individuals with adequate baseline nutrition shows minimal to no benefit in controlled trials. The FDA and FTC have taken action against numerous companies for making unsubstantiated immune-boosting claims, yet the category continues generating billions in annual revenue. Sleep is by far the most evidence-supported intervention for immune function available without a purchase. A 2015 study in sleep found that individuals sleeping fewer than 6 hours per night were 4.2 times more likely to develop a cold after rhinovirus exposure than those sleeping 7 hours or more. Chronic stress suppresses immune function through glucocorticoid signaling. Cortisol is directly immunosuppressive at sustained levels. Addressing sleep deprivation and chronic stress has more measurable impact on immune function than any supplement currently marketed for this purpose. You are trying to boost a system that works by being precisely calibrated, not maximally activated. Sleep 7 hours, reduce your chronic stress. Stop purchasing a supplement to solve a problem that a consistent bedtime could address more effectively and at no cost. 36. Protein bars sit in the health food aisle. They display protein content prominently. They reference fitness, performance, and recovery on their packaging. Athletes hold them in advertisements. Through sheer repetition and strategic retail placement, they have been absorbed into the cultural category of health food without most people examining what else is in them alongside the protein. Most commercially sold protein bars are nutritionally closer to a candy bar with an aggressive marketing department than to a whole food meal or a genuine dietary upgrade. The protein content is real, typically 20 to 30 grams, a legitimate nutritional contribution. The full ingredient picture surrounding that protein is frequently less impressive. Many popular bars contain 25 to 40 grams of sugar or sugar alcohols, 15 to 25 grams of fat, including saturated fat, and ingredient lists featuring multiple syrups, artificial flavors, palm kernel oil, and stabilizers, sugar alcohols, erythritol, maltitol, sorbitol, xylitol, are used in lower sugar bars to maintain sweetness while reducing the official sugar count. They are partially absorbed in the intestine and cause significant gastrointestinal distress, including bloating, gas, and diarrhea in sensitive individuals and at higher intakes. A 2019 investigation by the Clean Label Project, testing 134 top-selling protein powders and bars, found elevated levels of heavy metals, including lead, arsenic, cadmium, and mercury, in numerous plant-based protein products, with some exceeding established safety thresholds. Identical protein content from whole food sources: chicken, Greek yogurt, hard-boiled eggs, legumes. Costs substantially less per gram and comes with fiber, micronutrients, and ingredient lists that fit on one line. Some bars marketed as meal replacements contain 400 to 600 calories and are consumed as snacks in addition to regular meals, contributing directly to caloric surplus. The bar is wearing gym clothes. The ingredient list is what determines the nutritional category. The outfit was never the evidence. 37. Coffee has spent decades under a cloud of nutritional suspicion linked to heart disease, anxiety, dehydration, and stunted growth in the popular imagination. People drink it with a vague sense of managed indulgence, as though each cup is a small concession to a habit that a more disciplined version of themselves would have replaced with herbal tea. The current body of research tells a substantially different story. In the modern evidence landscape, moderate coffee consumption is associated with significant health benefits across multiple disease categories, and coffee is one of the most extensively studied dietary substances in nutritional literature. Coffee is the single largest source of antioxidants in the diet for most people in Western countries. Not because it is uniquely antioxidant dense per gram, but because it is consumed in large quantities relative to other antioxidant containing foods in typical diets. A 2014 meta-analysis in Annals of Internal Medicine found that coffee consumption was inversely associated with total mortality, meaning regular coffee drinkers had lower all-cause death rates across multiple large cohort studies. Regular consumption is associated with significantly reduced risk of type 2 diabetes, Parkinson's disease, liver cirrhosis, liver cancer, and Alzheimer's disease across multiple independent meta-analyses. The dehydration claim, persistent and widely repeated, does not hold up. Caffeine is a mild diuretic, but the fluid volume in a cup of coffee more than offsets any diuretic effect in habitual consumers who develop tolerance to caffeine's diuretic action. Coffee contributes net fluid to daily hydration. The stunted growth claim has no scientific support whatsoever. The negative effects of coffee concentrate in high doses in specific populations: pregnant women, people with certain cardiac arrhythmias, and individuals with high anxiety sensitivity, and in unfiltered preparations that raise LDL through diterpene compounds. You have been apologizing for a morning ritual that the research has been vindicating for decades. The guilt was manufactured. The evidence was always available. 38. The daily multivitamin is taken with the confidence of someone who has just renewed an insurance policy. A responsible backup system that covers nutritional gaps regardless of what actually appeared on the plate that day. The coverage implied by the ritual does not match what the available evidence actually supports. For most healthy adults eating a reasonably varied diet, multivitamin supplements provide no demonstrated reduction in chronic disease risk, and several high-dose individual supplements have shown associations with potential harm in large trials. A 2013 editorial in Annals of Internal Medicine, written by researchers who had reviewed major vitamin supplementation trials, concluded that supplementing the diet of well-nourished adults with most mineral or vitamin supplements has no clear benefit and might be harmful for some. The Iowa Women's Health Study, following over 38,000 women for nearly 20 years, found that multivitamin use was associated with a slightly higher risk of all-cause mortality compared to non-users with high-dose iron, folic acid, and copper supplementation showing the strongest negative signals. Nutrients in whole foods exist alongside thousands of other compounds. Phytochemicals, fiber, cofactors, and synergistic molecules that affect absorption, metabolism, and biological activity in ways that an isolated pill cannot replicate. Specific, verified deficiencies have well-established supplement benefit: vitamin D in northern latitudes with limited sun exposure, B12 in people following vegan diets, folate during pregnancy, and iron in women of reproductive age with documented deficiency. These are targeted interventions for documented needs, not general insurance policies for imprecise concerns. Fat-soluble vitamins, including A, D, E, and K, accumulate in body fat and can reach toxic levels with excessive supplementation. The U.S. dietary supplement industry generates approximately $60 billion annually and is regulated under legislation that does not require pre-market safety testing or efficacy demonstration. The pill is a note that says you tried. Your biology requires more than the note. 39. The fear of metabolic damage from skipping meals is one of diet culture's most durable anxieties. The belief that missing a meal is not merely inconvenient, but actively destructive, permanently slowing the metabolism, training the body to cling to fat, and creating consequences that compound over time. Resting metabolic rate does not meaningfully drop from skipping a meal, and genuine adaptive thermogenesis requires prolonged, sustained caloric restriction over weeks, not a skipped lunch on a busy Tuesday. Resting metabolic rate actually increases modestly during the first 36 to 48 hours of fasting, driven by a rise in norepinephrine that mobilizes fat stores for fuel and stimulates thermogenesis. Studies show a 3 to 10% increase in metabolic rate within the first 2 days of complete fasting, the opposite of what the starvation mode narrative predicts. Adaptive thermogenesis, the genuine reduction in resting metabolic rate that occurs in response to sustained restriction, is mediated by drops in leptin, thyroid hormone T3, and sympathetic nervous system activity over weeks and months of caloric deficit. Meta-analyses suggest the magnitude of this adaptation accounts for approximately 100 to 200 calories daily below predicted values, meaningful in prolonged dieting contexts, not remotely equivalent to the dramatic metabolic collapse popular media describes. Muscle mass is the primary driver of resting metabolic rate, accounting for approximately 20 to 25% of total resting metabolic rate in lean individuals. Preserving muscle through resistance training and adequate protein intake during caloric restriction protects metabolic rate far more effectively than managing meal timing or frequency. Intermittent fasting protocols have been studied extensively and show no evidence of suppressed metabolic rate in the short to medium term when adequate total calories are consumed within the eating window. Your metabolism survived ice ages and famines through genuine adaptive mechanisms. One skipped lunch is not a metabolic emergency. The anxiety about the skipped meal burns more energy than the meal itself. 40. Coconut oil underwent one of wellness culture's most dramatic rehabilitation arcs. From ordinary cooking fat to cure-all, reframed as a brain booster, fat-burning agent, antimicrobial compound, and anti-aging intervention all at once. People replaced all other oils in their kitchens and felt like nutritional pioneers operating ahead of conventional medicine. Coconut oil is approximately 92% saturated fat, the highest saturated fat content of any commonly consumed cooking fat. The extraordinary health claims rest on selective interpretation of limited and contested evidence. Coconut oil's proponents center their argument on medium-chain triglycerides, saturated fats metabolized differently from long-chain saturated fats, absorbed directly into the portal vein, and processed in the liver rather than stored peripherally. However, coconut oil contains only about 15% MCTs, primarily lauric acid. Pure MCT oil supplements contain far higher concentrations. Coconut oil is not a reliable or efficient MCT source compared to pharmaceutical MCT preparations. Lauric acid, the dominant fatty acid in coconut oil, is classified as a long-chain fatty acid by some researchers because it behaves more similarly to long-chain fats in metabolic studies than to true MCTs like caprylic or capric acid. Coconut oil raises LDL cholesterol significantly, more than olive oil, canola oil, or lard in multiple controlled trials. A 2020 meta-analysis in Circulation found coconut oil consumption raised LDL cholesterol substantially compared to non-tropical vegetable oils. The American Heart Association issued a formal advisory in 2017 recommending against using coconut oil for cardiovascular health, noting that 82% of its fat is saturated, higher than butter at 63%, beef fat at 50%, and lard at 39%. The cognitive benefit claims linked to Alzheimer's disease treatment are based on a single uncontrolled case report and small, low-quality studies. There are no large randomized controlled trials supporting coconut oil as a dementia intervention. The rehabilitation story was more compelling than the evidence. A cooking fat is a cooking fat. 41. Choosing whole wheat bread feels like the disciplined, health-conscious decision at the grocery store. It is brown. It says whole grain on the package. It costs more. It must be meaningfully better. In most cases, the difference between what the label implies and what is inside the bag is larger than you have been led to believe. In the United States, bread can be labeled whole wheat if whole wheat flour is the primary flour ingredient. But there is no minimum percentage requirement attached to that designation. Many products marketed as whole wheat are largely refined white flour with a small proportion of whole wheat added for color and label compliance. The phrases made with whole grains, multigrain, wheat bread, stone ground, and 100% natural do not indicate whole grain content and appear routinely on products made predominantly from refined flour. Genuine 100% whole wheat bread, made entirely from whole grain flour retaining the bran, germ, and endosperm, has a glycemic index of approximately 71. White bread has a glycemic index of approximately 75. The difference is real and modest. The nutritional advantage of genuine whole grain bread comes primarily from fiber, B vitamins, vitamin E, iron, and magnesium present in the bran and germ, all of which are stripped during refining. Authentic whole grain products deliver these nutrients. Many commercial whole wheat breads contain substantial added sugar, elevated sodium, and preservatives that complicate the health narrative on the label's front face. True whole grain foods, steel-cut oats, quinoa, barley, farro, brown rice, deliver the fiber and micronutrient density that bread marketing implies without the formulation compromises common in commercial bread production. The color of the bread and the confidence of the front label are not the same thing as the ingredient list. The ingredient list is facts. The front of the package is a pitch. 42. The glass of red wine for heart health narrative has been one of nutrition's most beloved prescriptions. A medical justification for a pleasure that needed no medical justification. It appeared in clinical guidelines, in doctors' offices, and extensively in wine industry communications. The moderate drinking and cardiovascular benefit hypothesis has since been significantly challenged by more rigorous analytical methods, and the alcoholist medicine framing has become considerably harder to defend. The association between moderate alcohol consumption and better cardiovascular outcomes was based primarily on large epidemiological studies comparing abstainers, moderate drinkers, and heavy drinkers. Moderate drinkers consistently appeared healthier. But the abstainer category includes people who quit drinking due to illness, a confounding factor called sick quitter bias that systematically makes abstainers look less healthy than they would otherwise be. When Mendelian randomization studies, which use genetic variants to estimate causal effects of alcohol while removing confounding, are applied, the cardiovascular benefit of moderate drinking disappears or becomes negligible across multiple independent analyses. The IARC classifies alcohol as a Group 1 carcinogen. Alcohol consumption is causally linked to cancers of the mouth, pharynx, larynx, esophagus, stomach, colon, rectum, liver, and breast, with no established safe threshold for cancer risk. The WHO's position is that no level of alcohol consumption is safe from a cancer risk perspective. Resveratrol, the polyphenol in red wine most frequently cited as the cardioprotective agent, is present in quantities so small per glass that you would need to consume hundreds of glasses daily to approach the doses used in laboratory research showing biological effects. The 2018 Global Burden of Disease Analysis published in The Lancet found that accounting for all health outcomes, the safest level of alcohol consumption is 0. You were handed a medical permission slip for something that required no permission, and the science behind that slip was far more contested than the industry that benefited from it ever communicated. 43. Starting the day with warm lemon water to alkalize your body has accumulated an impressive set of credentials: Instagram wellness culture, celebrity endorsement, alternative health practitioners, and no supporting physiological evidence of any kind. It feels clean and proactive. It is performing a function that your body's existing systems render entirely unnecessary. Your body maintains blood pH within an extremely narrow range, 7.35 to 7.45, through respiratory and renal mechanisms of such precision and power that no food or beverage can meaningfully shift it. Conditions called acidosis and alkalosis, involving blood pH deviations of even 0.1 to 0.2, cause organ failure and require intensive medical intervention. This is not a wellness problem solvable with citrus water. Lemon juice is acidic. It has a pH of approximately 2 to 3. The alkalizing claim refers to the theory that after digestion and metabolism, lemon juice leaves an alkaline residue in the body, a concept derived from ash analysis of food combustion that does not correspond to physiological blood pH regulation. The kidneys are the primary organs responsible for pH homeostasis, selectively excreting bicarbonate and hydrogen ions to maintain the set point. Urine pH can be influenced by diet, but urine pH and blood pH are entirely separate systems. Alkaline urine does not indicate alkaline blood. Drinking lemon water does deliver vitamin C, potassium, and flavonoids in modest amounts. Drinking water is genuinely beneficial for hydration. The lemon water habit may support health in practical ways, but not through the alkalizing mechanism its proponents describe, because that mechanism is not how blood chemistry works. The alkaline diet has been specifically addressed by oncologists who note it has been falsely promoted as a cancer treatment. No peer-reviewed clinical study has demonstrated that alkaline-promoting foods change blood pH in healthy individuals. You cannot alkalize your blood with a beverage. You cannot alkalize your blood at all without a hospital involved. 44. Nuts were casualties of the fat phobia era, calorie-dense, fat-rich, and therefore treated as something to be rationed or avoided by anyone with weight management goals. The handful of almonds that should have been a snack was replaced with rice cakes. Macadamias stayed firmly in the treat category, consumed with mild guilt. This was a meaningful nutritional mistake with decades of consequences. Regular nut consumption is associated with lower body weight, reduced cardiovascular risk, and longer lifespan across multiple large prospective studies, despite the caloric density that made them suspect in the first place. The PREDIME trial, one of the largest randomized dietary intervention studies ever conducted, involving over 7,000 participants, found that a Mediterranean diet supplemented with mixed nuts reduced major cardiovascular events by approximately 30% compared to a low-fat control diet. Nut consumers consistently weigh less than non-consumers in large epidemiological datasets, a finding that appears paradoxical until the mechanisms become clear. Nuts are highly satiating due to their protein, fat, and fiber combination, and their caloric absorption is incomplete due to intact cell walls that resist full digestion. Research on almond consumption specifically shows approximately 20 to 32% of almond calories are not absorbed because the fat is encased in cell walls that survive digestion. The label says 160 calories per ounce. You absorb roughly 129. A 2013 study in the New England Journal of Medicine found that consuming nuts 7 or more times per week was associated with a 20% lower risk of all-cause mortality compared to never eating them. Nuts provide monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats, vitamin E, magnesium, folate, fiber, plant sterols, and arginine, a precursor to nitric oxide that supports vascular function. You placed the most evidence-supported snack in the treat category and replaced it with a product engineered to resemble food. The nut never required rationing. The rice cake always did. 45. The low-fat label still triggers a reflexive sense of virtuous selection in grocery stores because it was engineered to do exactly that. Low-fat yogurt. Reduce fat peanut butter. Fat-free salad dressing. The category was built on the assumption that reducing fat reduces caloric density and produces better metabolic outcomes. The outcomes did not cooperate. Low-fat products routinely compensate for palatability lost during fat removal by increasing refined carbohydrates, sugar, sodium, and artificial additives, producing items that are frequently worse for metabolic health than their full-fat predecessors. Fat carries flavor compounds and creates the textural properties, creaminess, mouthfeel, satiety signaling, that make foods satisfying and that slow its digestion. Removing fat creates a product that tastes and feels inferior. Manufacturers correct this with refined carbohydrates and sugar. Low-fat peanut butter has approximately the same calories per serving as regular peanut butter because the fat calories are replaced by starch and sugar calories, while the satiety-promoting fat content is reduced and the glycemic response is increased. Fat-free salad dressing is particularly counterproductive. The fat-soluble vitamins and carotenoids, including lutein, lycopene, and beta-carotene, present in salad vegetables require dietary fat for absorption. Eating a salad with fat-free dressing significantly reduces the absorption of these nutrients regardless of how much of them the salad contains. The low-fat era from roughly 1980 to 2000 coincided with a dramatic increase in added sugar across the U.S. food supply as manufacturers reformulated products. Average sugar consumption rose substantially during this period, alongside rising rates of obesity and metabolic disease. A 2016 meta-analysis found no association between full-fat dairy consumption and cardiovascular disease, and some analyses suggest full-fat dairy is associated with reduced type 2 diabetes risk compared to low-fat dairy. The low-fat label described a manufacturing choice, not a health outcome. You removed the ingredient that provided satiety and replaced it with the one that drives cravings. 46. Washing raw chicken before cooking is a kitchen habit practiced with genuine conviction, a precautionary step that feels like basic hygiene, something any responsible cook would do as a matter of course. Food safety experts have been trying to communicate the opposite message for years with limited success because the habit runs deep and the logic behind it feels intuitive. Washing raw chicken does not reduce the bacterial load on the meat in any meaningful way. It redistributes pathogenic bacteria from the chicken surface to your sink, countertops, utensils, adjacent food items, and your clothing through aerosolization and splashing. Campylobacter jejuni and Salmonella, the two most common bacterial pathogens in raw poultry, are both killed by heat. Cooking chicken to an internal temperature of 165 degrees Fahrenheit eliminates both organisms reliably. Washing eliminates neither. UK Food Standards Agency research using specially formulated dye to simulate bacterial spread during chicken washing found that sink splashing contaminated surfaces up to 3 feet from the sink, reaching countertops, utensils, other food, and the cook's clothing. The CDC identifies washing raw poultry as a food safety hazard and actively campaigns against the practice. A 2019 USDA consumer behavior study found that even after participants watched a video explaining the contamination risk in detail, many still washed their poultry during the subsequent cooking observation, illustrating how deeply embedded the habit is relative to the available information. Campylobacter is the most common bacterial cause of foodborne illness in the United States, responsible for an estimated 1.5 million illnesses annually. Cross-contamination from poultry preparation is a primary transmission route. The sensory cues driving the washing impulse, the desire to remove sliminess, visible residue, or the smell of raw meat, are not risk indicators. The bacteria causing illness are invisible and odorless. The bacteria were never afraid of your faucet. They were delighted by your cutting board. 47. In fitness and nutrition circles, every meal without protein is treated as a missed biological opportunity, a gap in an anabolic schedule that must be filled with animal protein, Greek yogurt, eggs, or a supplement to avoid falling behind on muscle synthesis. The per-meal protein mandate has expanded from competitive athletes into general dietary advice, and its application to most people's lives is more rigid than the evidence supports. While adequate total daily protein is genuinely important for muscle synthesis, satiety, and metabolic health, the strict protein at every meal prescription is not meaningfully superior for most people compared to consuming protein across fewer, protein-rich meals distributed reasonably across the day. Muscle protein synthesis responds to protein doses of approximately 20 to 40 grams per meal in most adults. Beyond this threshold, additional protein in a single sitting does not proportionally increase synthesis. Excess amino acids are oxidized for energy rather than directed into muscle building. The leucine threshold concept suggests each meal should contain sufficient leucine, approximately 2 to 3 grams, to maximally stimulate muscle protein synthesis, achievable through roughly 25 to 30 grams of complete protein from most animal or complementary plant sources. Some research supports protein distribution across multiple meals for synthesis optimization, but the practical difference between 3 protein-rich meals and 6 smaller protein-containing meals is small compared to the effective total daily intake. Plant-based eaters relying on incomplete protein sources benefit from diverse intake across the day to cover all essential amino acids, but do not need to combine proteins within every individual meal. The clearest evidence base for rigid per-meal protein distribution exists in older adults, where muscle protein synthesis becomes less efficient with age and leucine. Sufficient doses per meal show more meaningful benefit for preventing muscle loss. For a healthy adult eating adequate total protein across 2 or 3 balanced meals, the optimization benefit of precise per-meal protein accounting is marginal. The total matters, the timestamp is secondary. 48, the negative calorie food concept is one of nutrition's most seductive loopholes. The idea that certain foods cost more energy to digest than they provide, meaning eating them produces a net caloric deficit rather than a contribution. Celery is the standard example. Cucumber and lettuce appear regularly in the same conversation. Eating these foods would mean burning calories by eating, a satisfying conceptual workaround to the fundamental constraint of caloric intake. Negative calorie foods do not exist in any scientifically meaningful sense. The thermic effect of digesting any food is dramatically smaller than its caloric content, without exception. A medium stalk of celery contains approximately 6 calories. The thermic effect of food, energy expended in digestion, absorption, and metabolism, averages approximately 10% of calories consumed. Digesting that celery stalk expends roughly 0.6 calories. Net calorie contribution, approximately 5.4, not negative. For a food to be genuinely negative calorie, its thermic effect would need to exceed 100% of its caloric content, meaning digestion would cost more energy than the food provides. No whole food has been documented to achieve this in controlled conditions. No peer-reviewed nutritional study has demonstrated a negative calorie food. The concept has been specifically addressed and rejected by dietitians and nutritional biochemists across multiple institutional reviews. The confusion arises partly because high-water, high-fiber vegetables like celery genuinely do support weight management through satiety, volume eating, hydration, and displacement of higher calorie options, but through quantity and substitution, not negative calorie arithmetic. The water content of celery is approximately 95%, contributing to its low caloric density of roughly 16 calories per 100 grams. It is an excellent food. Its value is real. It just does not work against itself. The math was never on the other side of zero. The celery was always good enough without the myth attached to it. 49. The spot reduction myth sits at the intersection of fitness and nutrition because it sells products in both categories. AB exercise programs, waist targeting supplements, slimming teas, and body wraps all marketed on the premise that you can direct your body to preferentially burn fat from a specific location through targeted effort. You cannot. Fat is mobilized systemically through hormonal signals released into the bloodstream during exercise and caloric deficit, not from the muscle tissue nearest to the movement being performed. Lipolysis, the biochemical breakdown of stored fat for fuel, is triggered by adrenaline and glucagon release systemically. These hormones access fat stores throughout the body based on genetic fat distribution patterns, hormonal environment, and overall energy balance. They do not respond to local muscular demand. A 2013 study published in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research had participants perform 12 weeks of abdominal exercise training with no other lifestyle changes. Fat distribution in the abdominal region was unchanged compared to controls, while overall fat mass decreased slightly. An older study at the University of Massachusetts had participants perform thousands of forearm-specific exercises over several weeks. Fat biopsies taken from the forearm, abdomen, and subscapular region showed no preferential fat loss in the exercise limb. Where the body deposits and mobilizes fat is determined primarily by genetics. Fat distribution patterns are strongly heritable. Sex hormones and cortisol levels, which are associated with visceral abdominal fat accumulation. Visceral fat does respond well to overall caloric deficit and sustained aerobic exercise, but this is a systemic metabolic effect, not targeted spot reduction. The products marketed around this myth, belly fat burner teas, abdominal targeting protocols, waist wraps, function by exploiting a desire for localized control over a system that does not operate that way. You cannot send a withdrawal notice to a specific fat cell. The body decides where to make withdrawals. Your job is to create the conditions. The location has never been negotiable. 50-capsaicin, the compound that makes chili peppers register as hot, has been blamed for gastric damage so consistently and for so long that people with any digestive complaint are routinely advised to eliminate heat from their diet entirely. It burns on the way in. The assumption that it burns the stomach lining on the way through feels biologically coherent. The evidence does not support it in people without pre-existing conditions. Capsaicin does not damage healthy stomach lining. Research increasingly suggests it may have protective properties for gastric mucosa, and the long-standing belief that it causes or accelerates ulcer formation has been largely contradicted by the evidence developed since the bacterial cause of ulcers was established. As established earlier in this list, peptic ulcers are caused primarily by Helicobacter pylori infection in 70 to 90% of cases, with the remaining 10 to 30% caused primarily by NSAIDs. Capsaicin does not cause ulcers through either mechanism. Capsaicin activates TRPV1 receptors on sensory neurons throughout the gastrointestinal tract, triggering local release of compounds that stimulate mucus secretion and promote blood flow to the gastric mucosa. A gastroprotective response rather than a damaging one. A study published in Digestive Diseases and Sciences found that populations with high capsaicin consumption in regions of Mexico and India have lower rates of peptic ulcer disease than populations with low capsaicin intake. In people with pre-existing ulcers, heartburn, or gastroesophageal reflux disease, capsaicin can exacerbate symptoms by stimulating acid secretion and relaxing the lower esophageal sphincter. This is irritation of a pre-existing condition, not creation of a new one. Capsaicin has been investigated as a potential therapeutic compound in irritable bowel syndrome, where desensitization of TRPV1 receptors may reduce visceral hypersensitivity over time. The burning sensation during digestion is neurological. It is your sensory nervous system doing its job. It is not tissue damage, and your stomach lining was handling it better than the dietary advice you received ever acknowledged. 51. The diet industry generates billions by selling certainty, the conviction that one specific dietary system unlocks optimal health for all humans simultaneously. Keto, carnivore, vegan, paleo, raw food, alkaline. Each arrives not as one option among many, but as the definitive answer your biology has been waiting for, the framework that everyone else has gotten wrong. No single dietary pattern is universally optimal for all people. The evidence for genuine human nutritional individuality is measurable and well documented. and it undermines every rigid dietary ideology simultaneously. Human populations have thrived on dramatically different diets across history. The traditional Inuit diet was approximately 50% protein and 35% fat with minimal plant foods. Traditional Okinawan diet was approximately 85% carbohydrate, primarily sweet potato. East African pastoralist cultures consumed predominantly animal products including raw milk. All achieved low rates of chronic disease within their traditional ecological contexts. The gut microbiome, now recognized as a critical modifier of how food affects individual health, varies enormously between people. A 2015 landmark study published in Cell by researchers at the Weizmann Institute showed that blood glucose responses to identical foods varied dramatically between individuals, driven significantly by differences in gut microbiome composition. One person spiked sharply to white rice, another to a banana. Genetic variation affects nutrient metabolism in documented ways. MTHFR gene variants affect folate processing. APOE epsilon 4 carriers show different cardiovascular responses to saturated fat. Lactase persistence determines adult dairy tolerance. The DietFits trial at Stanford, a well-designed 12-month randomized controlled trial published in 2018, found enormous individual variation in outcomes between low-fat and low-carbohydrate diets with no clear population-level winner. The most consistent findings across all major dietary research traditions share universal principles: abundant vegetables and fruits, minimal ultra-processed foods, adequate protein, and limited added sugar. The macronutrient ratios achieving this vary widely between individuals. The perfect diet is the one you can maintain consistently using whole foods for the rest of your life. Everything telling you otherwise is selling you the certainty your biology was never designed to require. If you want to see more, click the video on screen now.